To order. This is the Citizens Advisory Committee of the Costa Mesa Sanitary District. This is the second in our public hearings of the redistricting process. We'll start the agenda. We'll call this meeting to order at 6:02. We'll start with roll call.
Shane Smith.
Here.
Tom Brenneman.
Here.
Phil Marsh.
Here.
Mike McElroy.
Here.
Andrew Nielsen.
Here.
Vice Chair Albert Graham Jr.
Here.
And Chairman Mike Carey.
Present.
Thank you.
Okay, at this time, we'd like to open up the floor to public comments. So if there's any members from the public that would like to speak, please step up to the microphone at the podium. Seeing no members of the public at this time, we'll move right into the public hearing. I think Scott Carroll wanted to come up and give an update.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good evening, committee members. I just wanted to give you a brief update since the last time we met. There's been some comments and suggestions by committee members, and I just wanted to give you an update. We followed up on those suggestions. The first one, I think committee member Sue Lester requested that we put Mesa Water's maps, the voting maps on our website, which we did. We put a link on our website, so you click on the link, you'll go and see how their maps are drawn up, and we also explain why it's not a good idea, or why to have our districts match their districts. We also put a link up to the City of Costa Mesa's new maps as well, so that's available to the public. And then community member Brandon requested a map of all our pump stations, location of pump stations. We have that over here on the table. I do apologize that it's not a very clear map. What I'm going to do is I'm going to call our GIS consultant tomorrow morning, and we'll email you a clearer map of our pump stations. And just FYI, if you know what's a pump station. So we have 20 pump stations here in the Costa Mesa Sanitary District, and because of the topography of the land, we got to push the wastewater. Most of the wastewater system flows by gravity, but sometimes we can't do that. So we have pump stations that push it, and then it feeds back into a gravity line. And they're all different sizes of pump stations, the significant factor for our pump stations is obviously power. So when we lose power at a pump station, we have a certain amount of time to get a generator out there, otherwise we're going to have a sewer flow. So that's very important for us. But if you want to know where they're located, we do have a map here, and again, I'll apologize, I'll get a clearer map for you tomorrow morning. So happy to answer any questions if you have any. Okay, thank you. And now I'm going to turn it over to our demographer. I'm going to turn it to Deborah Deep, and she's going to take it from here. So thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Carroll.
Mr. Chairman, just a quick point of order. I apologize. I missed committee member Elodie Katz on the roll call. Thank you.
Thank you.
So hello again. Welcome back. I think we can will this move forward with this too? Maybe not? Okay. So we're going to recap some of the information that we presented at the first public hearing, but we'll go a little bit more quickly through it because it is a repeat. But if you have any questions during, feel free to stop and ask. So again, during any districting process, we use the 2010 Redistricting Data Set. This is called the Public Law File 94-171. It's census block level data, and it contains population by race, ethnicity, and then also for the total population 18 and over by race, ethnicity. Data is posted online. The second data set that's used with districting processes are the Citizen Voting Age Population, or CVAP. This again is data from the U.S. Census Bureau. It's come from the American Community Survey, which is a monthly survey of 250,000 households over and across the nation. These are 5-year estimates that are released at the census block group level data, or level. And this has the population that is by race, ethnicity, that is 18 and over, and that are U.S. citizens. And thus, we get the citizen voting age population. And again, the data is available online. So here we have the census geography hierarchies. There were some questions about the different levels of geographies that are available. So in the orange, if we can, my pointer's working or not. It doesn't seem to be working very well. Okay, so in the orange we have the census blocks. These are the lowest level of geography that the data is published at for any decennial census data. And so the blocks nest into what are called block groups, and it's just what it sounds like. They are groups of blocks. It can be anywhere from 1 to, I think it's up to about 19, but usually it's anywhere between 1 and 10 census blocks nest into block groups. These census block groups, these are the green ones, nest into these, what would be the blue, called the census tracts, and it's with the CT, it's not a CK, so it's census tracts. And then census tracts nest into counties. So the 3 geographies that the Census Bureau creates that aren't what, in a sense, the lay people would use are the census blocks, census block groups, and then census tracts. Those nest into county lines and then don't cross over county boundaries. The blocks are also assigned each to what's called a census place. They can be incorporated cities, it can be on the unincorporated part of the county, or it can be CDPs or census designated places. So in Orange County, these are unincorporated areas that have known boundaries, places like Rossmore, Midway City, Las Flores, Coto de Caza, Sunset Beach, Ladera Ranch, North Tustin. So we have the census blocks, those get assigned a census place, which is either a CDP or an incorporated city or unincorporated county, and then those go up into the county boundaries. Because again, jurisdictions and cities don't cross over county lines. Within this, there's this other geography that we're calling census partial block group. Those are groups of blocks that are within a particular jurisdiction, like say the city of Costa Mesa. But if a block group they don't take into consideration jurisdictional boundaries. And so a block group may bleed over and be partially in Newport Beach and partially in Costa Mesa. It could also have a part in unincorporated county. So when we're talking about partial block groups, these 2 blocks here, a partial block group would be groups of blocks within a block group, but they're only within one jurisdiction. For the purposes of districting for the sanitary district, we generically just said block group because partial block group, and going into this detailed explanation when people are just using a public participation kit, it's probably a little bit too detailed. So that's why we have the information here. But again, the partial block group is groups of blocks that would be within, say, one district or one jurisdiction. And I think we're going to have to, I don't think it's, yeah, okay. So one of the requests that was made last week was to have the information, because it is available, the total population at the block level. So this map was developed and posted online. It's on a PDF. It is on the website already. And there are actually 1,269 census blocks within the Costa Mesa Sanitary District. That's a lot of blocks. The county itself has over 36,000. But we took this 1,269, and what we did was we said, okay, let's make this a manageable districting process, especially when you're, say, dealing with paper maps or even with the Excel file, having to somehow print out a map that will show and be legible the 1,269 total population numbers, and then with an ID on top of that. It seemed a little much. So what we did was we used the existing census blocks, the existing census block groups where possible, and then on the side you have a couple areas that would be on the side. For example, this big one over here, this actually census block group does bleed over into other jurisdictions, but we only took the portion that's within the sanitary district. And so we have some partial block groups in your districting effort, but again, the population numbers are only for those areas that are within the district. So for generic terms, to make things easier, we just decided to call everything block groups, not going into partial and some partial and some not. So these were consolidated into 80 block groups. Next, thanks. So this is a blow up of just a section of the map, just so you can get an idea. The blocks are not necessarily easy to follow. They are designed to follow geographic features that are long-standing. They try and not change them over time, but especially if there is development in an area or redevelopment, they will adjust them through recommendations that are provided by each county, and then the Census Bureau makes consideration on those. But you can just see that there are a couple that are just kind of weirdly shaped. This one down here kind of goes all the way across here. It's just kind of bizarre. So there's no necessarily, it doesn't seem like there may be a rhyme or reason to some of the block boundaries, but they do try and group areas together that are similar when possible. But again, you can have a number of blocks within a block group, but within those you just have to kind of look in and dig into that big PDF map and blow it up and see what it looks like. If in the districting effort somebody wanted to split a block group, you'd want to follow, if you take one of these maps and follow, say for example, if you wanted to split 28, I think this is 28, if you wanted to split it along a block because it seemed too big, you'd have to fit it around those block lines and then split that block group into half based on what some of the boundary lines. So if when somebody's going through districting effort, it's okay to supplement the block group map with the block map. But again, just to make things a little easier and streamline the processes, we were dealing with the block group level. So again, we are back to our standard census block group map for your plan submissions. Again, 80 seems a lot more reasonable than 1,269, but folks can do either, submit either one that they would like. Again, if you have something like a PDF, you can actually go in and draw within a PDF, highlight and make different areas. So if you wanted to, you could summarize that data. So again, with the public participation kit, we have the map, and the goal is to draw the 5 divisions with population as close to 23,235 people as possible. And we have our block map, our block group map. When, again, for the districting process, we're doing, collecting data and using data that's only for the district itself. One of the questions that was brought up last week as well was the water retailers or the water agencies, the water providers in the county. So to this map, which shows the district boundaries in black and then the cities underneath in the different colors, the red dashed line is the water agency boundaries. And so you can see that they don't match up to the district boundary for the Costa Mesa Sanitary District. So we're starting again with 116,176 people for the districting effort. We want to take the number of board members, which you have 5, and divide that total population by 5. And so again, our ideal population is about 23,235 people. The sample that we had before, we're using the same type of thing. For Division 1, if it's 976 people above the target population, it's 4.2% above. For Division 2, if it's 929 people below the ideal population, it's 4% below. And then what we're looking for is a population spread of absolutely under 10%, but you want to get as near to 0 as possible. So in this sample scenario, it's 8.8% spread between the lowest division, the smallest division at 4% under, and the largest division at 4.8% above. At 8.8%, you probably want to try and get a little bit closer, if it's possible, to 0. Sometimes it's not, but again, you want to keep that spread under 10%. The redistricting criteria, again, first and foremost, you're looking for each division trying to get as near to that ideal population as possible. And then consideration may also be given to different factors, again, topography, geography, cohesiveness, contiguity, integrity, compactness of territory, communities of interest. One of the things that comes up with communities of interest is, again, what are these communities of interest? It's very vague. It can be many different things. We have brought up the Mesa Water District division boundaries, the City of Costa Mesa division boundaries, see if we can if they've already carved out some of these districts, maybe we can use those as well. Maybe those can influence the proposed director division boundaries that are being considered for Costa Mesa Sanitary District, but maybe not. Total population that we have in the district itself, because when you're looking at communities of interest, perhaps different racial and ethnic groups may have shared interests, and so those racial and ethnic groups are one of those criteria that people look at. You have the district population at 53.2% non-Hispanic white, 34.6% Hispanic of any race, 7.6% non-Hispanic Asian, 1.2% non-Hispanic Black, and 3.4% of all other non-Hispanic races and ethnicities. When we look at the citizen voting age population, you can see a sizable difference between what the total population is and the differences in the shares by race ethnicity for the CVAP population. The non-Hispanic white population at 64.1% of the share of the citizen voting age population is partly because non-Hispanic whites skew older in the county and in this district as well. So they tend to be having a higher age. Hispanic and Latinos of any race at 21.7%, they tend to be a younger population as well. In addition, a lower rate of U.S. citizenship. When you're doing districting, it doesn't matter if people are here documented or not. They count all persons, and so again, you'll have the total population and then the shares by citizen voting age. The non-Hispanic Asians are a little higher at 9.2%, non-Hispanic Black at 2.1%, and then all other non-Hispanic races and ethnicities at 3%. So this is the population shares for the total population that's non-Hispanic white. So 2010 total population, and if we go to the next map, you'll be able to see the difference in the shares of non-Hispanic whites as their citizen voting age population. Go back one. Yeah, so if you toggle back and forth between these two, you can see how the population shares. They're very similar, but they'll change just a little. And if we move forward one to the greens, we have the Hispanic and Latinos share of the total population, and then the next map is the share of a CVAP population for the Hispanic and Latinos. And then if we go to the next one, we have the share of non-Hispanic Asians for the total population of each block group. And the next one is the share of the citizen voting age population. Again, for the non-Hispanic, Black, or African American, no share is greater than the smallest quintile, which is at 20%. So because their population share is not greater than 20% in any of the block groups, we didn't bother showing creating a different CVAP map because it would be exactly the same. And then the same thing would be shown for all other non-Hispanic races or ethnicities. No block group has a share of greater than 20%. For the total population, it's the same for the CVAP, so we just use the same map. A question came up on owner-occupied households, of where is the distribution and share of owner-occupied households throughout the district. And so this is a map that we popped in today, which is, again, the lighter colors, the lighter yellows, are where the shares of owner-occupied households are either the lightest is up to 20%, and then 20 to 40 in the yellow. The green is from 40 to 59, and then the two blues, or kind of purpley on this map, is where the shares are greater than 60%. In the public participation kit, again, we want to collect information from folks and feedback, whether they have ideas or want to draw specific maps, comment on the process as a whole, or just some of the specific information that they'd like to provide or see or considered. And we've already heard some of those things, and those have been incorporated in your FAQs and provided on the website. We have always public comments are invited at any of the public hearing or any of the public meetings. And then there's 3 ways that we wanted to, in a sense, standardize ways to collect input. So we have the idea form, the map, and an Excel table that automates the process of assigning the block group. The idea form, again, a standard form. You fill in your contact information, or I guess you could submit it anonymously if you'd like, and then you just write whatever your ideas are. If you want to submit a map as well, you can just say, I'm going to submit a map, and then you summarize your information, and then you submit it to the clerk. Again, if you're going to submit a map, especially if you're going to scan a copy sometimes, or if you're going to fax a copy over, don't use light colors. Just take that black, thick permanent marker and draw those boundaries, and then provide it, either take a snapshot of it or fax it and scan it over to the clerk. The Excel file, we actually did receive one proposal, and somebody did utilize the Excel file. It has 5 worksheets, an instruction sheet, an author information, an assignments tab, summary tab, and then a blank reference map of the block groups. And the Excel file looks like this, where you have the reference map, and then you fill in the yellow column, the number of block groups, which division you want to assign it to, 1 through 5, and then there's a countdown at the top that shows you the numbers left to be assigned. And so this is what it looks like. We'll have the countdown get lower. It automatically calculates the total population and the deviation off the population. And then a summary table that shows you all of the information, including the population spread and all of the detailed information. When some of the folks are looking at the shares of the division populations, they want to look, some are looking at, can I create a Hispanic majority district, whether it's by total population or through the CVAP population, and that information is automatically calculated and tabulated in the Excel file. So map proposals, we need to have them by June 8th so we can package them and publish them as required by law before, 7 days before your next meeting, which is the third public hearing on June 20th. You submit all of your districting input to the district clerk, and it's going to be posted online as that goes as well. And then, as always, we refer all legal questions to council. And then, so the timeline, we've already had public hearing number 1. We're on public hearing number 2 right now. June 8th, which is Friday, is the deadline to submit maps. We have our third public hearing with the CAC being the lead group on June 20th. The CAC also has another meeting scheduled for July 18th, which is public hearing number 4. We'll have maps, all of the map proposals at public hearing number 3. If we have any revised maps, then we'll show them at public hearing number 4. And then the CAC will, as my understanding again, we're going to make a recommendation to the board on either a specific map or information that they want to provide to the board for consideration. And then on July 26th, we have public hearing number 5, where the board will make the final decision if they're going to go to divisions, and which map that would be. If there are any changes to any maps after public hearing number 3, those maps are presented. Any new maps will be presented 7 days before the July 26th public hearing. And then your districting schedule is posted online, and all the information is posted online. Do you have any other questions? Because again, your general manager did provide information on all the updates that are being posted online with all the additional information. Yes?
If you could remind us on the redistricting criteria, is that as dictated by law?
Yes.
Okay. And so it is an equal assignment of all population, not voting age population. That's the #1 priority.
Total population, yes.
Okay, and that should trump all other factors in terms of trying to get equally weighted population districts.
That's the primary, and then again, the other considerations are really what folds in when, if you can't hit that population exactly, and you're going to have some deviation off that target or ideal population, those other factors can be used to explain why you're not hitting that target population.
And of the other factors that we can use to make those decisions, is there any guidance, whether legal or just best practices, as to how to prioritize topography versus geography versus cohesiveness?
Not that I'm aware of. That's again, it's a consideration of everything as a whole. Yeah. Yes.
Kind of tagging on to what Andrew was asking, has there been any litigation against cities that have made this change, or districts, with regard to kind of analyzing how they came up with the redistricting that was problematic?
I don't think so. That again, I can't speak for the legal, but what I do know is, again, when they're looking at those things, the state, as far as I understand, and the feds aren't looking at, okay, coming down, you've done a proposal, you've submitted a map, and here's what your population spread and things. There's nobody going through and checking off boxes and saying, oh, I don't like what they did, or they're at 11%, or they're at 3.2, and they could have been at 3.1. But within that, again, you want to get down to that as near zero as possible in the population spread. 10% seems to be a high cap of don't go higher than that. But again, anything that's not zero and goes up to 10%, you want to be able to explain why. It could be because the CVAP population, you can create a minority-majority district. It could be, again, these natural features where you have these natural breaks in any city or something that would say, this is a group that's more cohesive, we're creating compact territory that makes more sense than trying to get to population by adding 1% difference by adding this other group that really isn't similar. So there's a very long in a sense, processes you could go through in court that could explain a defense of why you're doing all these things. But I also don't believe that the attorneys have to submit anything or document that during the districting process that says, this is exactly why we chose all of these different things.
And the 10% is just kind of like the cap is the best practice at this point, it's not.
There is either a court case or there is a legal, there is this 10% cap that you basically, that's the no-go zone. You don't go over 10%. But again, try and keep it, as low as possible. And you always see me look to counsel because I'm not an attorney and I know better than to speak for, so he'll wave his flag if I say something wrong.
Would you mind reminding us what a majority-minority division would look like and why that would be, problematic or not a good representation of the population for, as relates to electing board members?
Can we go back to one of the green maps, if you will? Yeah. Okay. So for communities of interest, and especially with the California Voting Rights Act, as opposed to the Federal Voting Rights Act, the Federal Voting Rights Act says one of the 3 criteria of creating divisions is to, I'm going to look over at Alan, if you can create there's the 3-prong test, and if you can create a minority-majority district, which is basically, that's a lay term for a protected class. And basically, a protected class is, then there's a whole thing in the law that describes it, but anybody who's non-Hispanic white, basically not a protected class. Everybody else, in a sense, is in, all the racial and ethnic groups are a protected class. So if you can create a district that has a majority of a protected class, that's a way to say that we're not having voting dilution in an at-large district. And so it could be possible to create a director division that groups together, say, some of these higher concentration areas down here. Again, looking at the total population as the main priority, but perhaps because there are some areas in the district that have higher concentrations of Hispanic and Latinos, maybe a director division that has a majority, which is 50%, 0.1, greater than 50%, has a majority of that director division. So if that was a priority for an author and somebody wanted to do that, then they could take these maps and create a Hispanic majority district, if you will. If we go to the next couple of maps, or at least the Asians, the Asians don't have a high enough concentration. They're basically spread throughout, and there's a nice diversity throughout the district. So looking at this, just looking at these numbers and the concentrations, you can just tell, I could do a statistical analysis and basically prove it, but you can just look at this map and say, there's no way to create a district or director division for your district that has a non-Hispanic Asian majority of that director division. So just looking at the maps, if we go back to the green maps, we would look and see that the Hispanics are in higher concentrations. They're in those darker greens, so it looks like it's possible to create a Hispanic majority director division.
And is that viewed as a net positive to create a protected class majority division when possible, so that there would be a greater likelihood of an elected official coming out of that protected class?
Yes, in the sense of there's no weighting of different priorities, but yes, that's one of those factors that would be, I can't say considered a positive, it's not a negative, if that makes sense.
Yeah, but could I just add that
Absolutely.
the requirement of the federal law that the challenger show that the minority group is sufficiently large and geographically compact to constitute a majority minority district. So that's an actual affirmative obligation they have to establish as part of their case if they're suing under the federal law. But that's been eliminated under California law. It's a much easier test, so they just basically have to show there's racially polarized voting, and you have an at-large district, and they've established their case. So then it shifts to, you just have to create divisions, and they have to be equal. And then the rest of the factors are like things you should take into consideration, but it's not really the test that might make it better under the spirit of the law. But the test is, you go to divisions and you make them equal. And you consider those things, but it's not part of the test.
So again, each author gets to prioritize their submissions of what they'd like to do. Any other questions? Ideas or discussion on additional topics of information? You got the pump stations and things like that. Was there any other additional items that folks were interested in? Are you all working on your maps?
There's only been one submission from the public so far?
Yes, it's been submitted to the district, and again, all of those will be shared. We have at least one, so there'll be at least one to discuss next week. But again, if we have any more, I don't know that, the committee could author one themselves. The committee members and the members of the public can submit their own. Yes?
Adding on to the minority majority question, discussion, so is it a reasonable consideration to break up to do that in two areas, like, so that if it's the minority groups could comprise more than 50% in two areas to break it up versus having it all in one, so that they would be represented by more than one one district?
So I'll take first stab at this one, and again, Alan will jump in and make sure that I don't say anything wrong.
Could you repeat the question, though?
I'll rephrase, because I've heard this before, and I'm pretty sure I know what you're asking. If you took, for example, these groups of the Hispanics that are in this concentration down here in the southwest of the district, and said, well, what if we create two districts, if we split up that population and try and create two districts where they have a majority of two districts, if that's possible, that would be better than, in a sense, trying to pack them all into one district and giving them a population of one. But if their concentrations and share of the population of the whole district as a whole, and the citizen voting age population as a whole, is not large enough to create two majorities, it would be a bad thing to split them, to say, well, we want to spread them out and put them over here in this division and then add some over here. That would be considered voting dilution, and you wouldn't want to do that. So if the population is large enough to create two, that's not a bad thing. But if it's not, you don't want to split up
Is there
the group.
anything else to consider besides the voting age? It looks like the numbers show that they pitched in 52.
This is where the citizen voting age population in this specific map would come into play. Because you just kind of, even though the districting file has population that's 18 and over, that one just kind of gets ignored and you start looking at the CVAP population. The idea of creating a majority district, or in this case, say a Hispanic majority district, to be able to do that, one, there's an assumption that they're voted in by those folks that are voters. So that's why you'd be looking at the citizen voting age population. And so it's under the CVAP population when you're looking at the population shares within, especially if you're looking at the Excel file. There's 3 categories of data. If you would she'll flip to the Excel file that has the table. I think 3 more. One, yeah, next one. So this one. So if you're working with the Excel file, this share, and then it's also in your existing conditions report for the district as a whole. This is the one where you're looking for the majority. Because if the total population, say you can create a Hispanic majority in the total population. Well, if the Hispanic population skews young, because they tend to be, on average, younger population than, say, non-Hispanic whites, then they might not be able to, in a sense, vote in their preferred candidate. So you want to look at the citizen voting age to see if there is a minority majority or a Hispanic majority division, because those would be the ones, in a sense, making that choice. Now, again, it actually doesn't matter if the candidate of choice or the measure, if you will, you have an up or down measure, vote yes or no. It doesn't matter if the candidate, for example, is of the same racial and ethnic group. It only matters who their preferred candidate is. It doesn't matter if they're of another race or ethnicity. So if you're going to create, and if your attempt is to create a minority-majority district, you want to be looking at that citizen voting age population and the share within that category.
That's sufficient even if
Could we
Oh,
could
they
we
want-
remind the speaker that we would all like to hear what she's having to say?
Yeah, please use microphones.
I was just asking if, considering the CVAP would be sufficient, sufficient to consider if the Hispanic minority group should be in two district, represented by two districts.
So you'd want to, number one, again, you're creating the divisions by total population, but as you're doing that, you can look at the CVAP population and the share of the population for each of the divisions as supplemental information to help guide you if you were attempting to create a minority-majority division. Yes?
Is there a ideal number of proposals that we're looking to have submitted, or even a minimum that we're looking to have submitted to be able to make it a viable process?
I've
And-
never heard of an ideal. Ideal could be one if everybody agreed on it. So there's not a minimum that's required, but we do have at least one. That's always good. It's fun if you have two, because then it's an either or, and then it just becomes a numbers game. If you have three, it's kind of like going to Claim Jumper versus a high-end restaurant where you can have 300 choices or you have 4 choices. So sometimes it's easier with more, sometimes it's easier with less, but there's no requirement.
Deborah, can I remind the committee also that you're subject to the Brown Act, so what you might come up with collaboratively, it has to be done in a properly noticed session. Otherwise, you can do it on your own and submit maps on your own, but you can't get together after school and have a study group.
So if you're going to talk about it, talk here and use the microphone.
I just had a general question.
Yeah.
So once, presuming that the board passes the motion and the redistricting happens, so every candidate would have to reside in each district, is that correct?
So part of the process, and what will happen next week as well, is you'll look at any maps that are submitted, and then there will also be a proposed schedule of the offset of directors, and it's usually split in 2 and 3 on a 5-member board, the cycle of election. So which 2 would go in the next one, which would be for 2020, and then the other 3 would be in 2022. For the first, nobody gets booted off the board.
Oh, right, no, I just meant once that happens and you
Yeah.
evolve through that. What if there is a district where no one wants to run? What happens in that? Has that ever occurred?
Yes, I'm sure it
There's an
has.
appointment process that,
Okay,
yeah,
okay.
it's specified in the government code.
Okay, thank you.
Yes. Oh, I thought we had a follow-up question. Any other additional questions or ideas? For now? Okay,
Nope. Thank you, Ms. Diep.
okay.
Okay, at this point, without having any other comments or questions from anyone in the group, we'll close this meeting at 6:41 p.m. Keeping in mind, our next meeting will be on June 20th.
I'm sorry. We can close the public hearing, but open it up for public comment?
Okay, guys. I apologize. So we'll close the public hearing, open it up to comment to anybody in the group. Any other comments or advisory committee comments are welcome at this point.
I'm just curious if anybody on the committee intends to take the time to, if anybody on the committee intends to submit a proposal, having, been well-versed and heard the presentation. Great, I was just curious. if a committee member submits one and we meet next, would they be able to kind of present and, justify their boundaries? Is there anything that would preclude them from doing that?
I believe that would just be considered another submission, just like any other public submission. Are there any other general comments for the group or from anyone in the audience? Mr. Moser?
Yes. Thank you, members of the committee. My name is Jim Moser, and I did have a couple of comments. Some of these perhaps a little repetitive to the ones I made last week, but not entirely. First one, some of the materials you saw last week gave the committee and the public the idea that in choosing the districts, you had the option of retaining the current structure of 5 directors or going to 7 or 9. I tried to find the law that would allow that to happen, and I was unable to find it. So I think it would be useful for the committee to know whether those are options rather than, spending a lot of time trying to make a 7-seat map if that's not a possibility. It seems important to know that. I also myself am still struggling a little bit with the idea of whether districting is good for the district. In a general purpose government, it makes a whole lot more sense to me than it does in a special district, and I can't quite see the advantages for the board of bickering over whose sewers in what particular part of the district are more important than other ones. So I'm wondering if there might be other options that the committee and later the board could consider other than this that would satisfy the perceived problem that we have. The district staff put some helpful links on the website to some supplementary material. I looked at the one from the Brennan Center, and they suggested the option of cumulative voting, it's called, in which you would give, like if you have 3 directors, if you have at-large election with 3 director seats open, you give each voter 3 votes, and they're allowed to put all their votes on a single candidate if they want to. So a special interest group, ethnic, economic, whatever, could, even though they're the minority, could get their candidate elected if they wanted to put all their votes on that candidate. And in fact, the demographic data shows we have about 1/3 Latinos, so if their votes were magnified 3 times and with 3 votes, they would then have enough to get their candidate elected without having to, and have all directors representing the district as a whole, which I think has some advantages. As to the supplemental information that you're getting here, I myself am still also struggling a little bit with what you're supposed to do with all this information about the ethnic composition and so forth, when the overriding objective is just to get equal populations in the district. And of the supplemental information that you've seen, I continue to think it would be good to know how much trash and sewer revenue is generated in each of those census blocks that you're working with, so that the 5 directors would represent kind of an equal financial interest in the district. And we've heard a whole lot about the citizen voting age population. I would really be interested in how many registered voters there are currently in each of those districts, because just because you're in the age group doesn't mean you're registered. And it would be good to have each of the directors kind of representing an equal number of voters. So while the exercise is guided by the population alone, if you're looking at those other things, seeing that it's an equal financial interest, because the directors have to represent not just voters, people, they have to represent the landowners of large, at South Coast Plaza, for instance, they don't vote, but they have a large economic interest in what the directors do. And then also about the minority districts that we heard, not in the presentation you saw, but there's this packet of, existing information, and the second to last map on that has what I think is more useful than the other maps you're showing. This is actually showing the Latino turnout in the most recent election in 2016. And unfortunately, because all the colors are the same, it's telling us that there's 3 precincts in Costa Mesa where the Latino turnout was somewhere between 40 and 60%. And, that could be 40 to 60 could be over a majority or under a majority. It probably would be helpful to know what the actual percentages were here. Even if you drew these tiny little precinct districts, would you have a Latino majority in the turnout? And you can't tell because it says it's somewhere between 40 and 60. Don't know. This is the second to last map in the existing conditions thing. And then the final comment is kind of repeated the comment I made the last time. I myself tried the exercise and didn't get too far with it with the map and the Excel spreadsheet. To me, the most obvious cohesive geographic area, partly because I live there, is the area that is to the east of Newport Boulevard and to south of Bristol. Our community is kind of divided by freeways and major streets that go through it. So I have this big block here, but it had 4,000 too many people in it. And probably if you went by registered voters, even a bigger amount than that. And then I couldn't logically figure out which part was not part of that should be taken out. So I was left kind of stumped. So I'm thinking other alternatives like cumulative voting or something of that sort might be a better solution for the district. And then finally, I found it very cumbersome trying to correlate the map with the spreadsheet. And I really think it would be easy to turn this into like a computer game. We don't seem to have time to do that here. And I don't, with all due respect, think it requires sophisticated GIS data to it. It's kind of like a tic-tac-toe game, and you just, if you punch on these and color it in, a computer should be able to add up how many you have in the different blocks and make it a whole lot easier for us, whether it's 5, 7, or 9 districts. And then the final question, final very comment I had that I meant to make at the beginning, I'm not very organized. We feel like we're under a timeline. There's these two legal questions, one whether we can have more than 5 directors or not, which I don't know the answer to. And the other is if we don't complete this exercise or find a final solution by August 6th, what actually are the consequences of that? Because I understand the lawyer cannot file a lawsuit against the Costa Mesa Sanitary District if the process isn't completed by then. But if the district is making a good faith effort to do something, which after all is not going to affect the election until 2020 at the soonest, how could that lawyer actually have a case against us if we're working on it in good faith? So I'm not sure that there's dire consequences if we don't finish by August 6th. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Moser.
Chair Carey, could I make some brief comments?
Yes, please.
That might be helpful, I don't know. We're going to encourage you to work with a 5-director solution, that there is a generalized solution that it can be 5 to 7 to 9, but I think that was a generalized answer in some materials that may have applied to other kinds of districts. Our Organic Act does require 5 directors, so we'd encourage you to put your emphasis on a 5-director solution. It also is theoretically possible that you could have cumulative voting. We understand that the registrar has advised that she will not process it if you try and do a cumulative voting. She says, we're just not going to do it. So it's a, that would be a challenge. So we'd encourage you not to spend any time thinking about that. And some agencies have tried the approach of good faith. We're working good faith, and we've got some other ideas. Maybe we'll do community public outreach, and that's usually met by the lawyers with an attitude of, we're going to sue you then. And I mean, I'm not saying we shouldn't do the right thing if it makes sense, but they prevail in all their cases, and I think they can make the showing. We have an at-large system, so they can make the showing that there's racially polarized voting. It's a very easy showing to make, and the remedy is divisions, and that cures it. And you certainly can fight the good fight, and some of those cities that I put on the board did fight the good fight, and they paid a few million to, in the end, be told they were wrong. But that is possible. I'm not discounting that somebody might prevail. It's a new law, and it hasn't been fully tested enough, but it's been tested in the trial courts enough, and there's been enough million-dollar verdicts that we think this is probably the right path to go on. At least your board of directors seems to be in favor of that, and your staff and our demographer. And that's not to say that's the only answer to this matter, but it's the one we're encouraging you to pursue. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Burns. Oh. Yep, the directors aren't allowed to speak at this meeting. Are there any other comments from the group? All right, hearing none, now I will officially adjourn this meeting at 6:52 p.m.